Today's topic is one that separates the master from the student, the memorable from the forgettable. Today we are going to talk about tension. My name is Seth, I'm a full-time fantasy author, and I like to make YouTube videos. Unless you're Stephen King, you could probably use a little bit of help with your tension. Not like your tension in your shoulders, though I'm sure many of you, like me, have that in abundance. No, I'm talking about the tension in your books, the tension in your writing. And since I'm not Stephen King, I count myself in that same camp. But I do have a few thoughts on the matter, and since this channel exists so I can air my thoughts, I'm excited to talk to you about it. I'm about to sum up this entire video for you. Tension exists in the anticipation of an event, not in the delivery of the event. And if you can grasp this fact, then you'll be 90% of the way there. The other 10%, of course, lies in the delivery. As anyone who watches horror movies knows, the real heart-pounding tension in the movie exists in the shadow of the masked killer, not in the cheap blood and special effects that come after the killer strikes. Just as a horror movie is going to keep you strung along the entire ride, only delivering the killer at the end, we want to do the same thing with our writing. We want our readers to be super engaged and plugged in to the story that we're telling. And we do that by having them invest their emotions in the outcome that we're promising. But that actually forces us into this strange balance. Writing is often about balance, and when we're talking about tension, it's more important than ever. Because if we deliver the payoff, the thing that we're promising them throughout our story, then their interest is going to be sated and they're going to move along. They're going to be done with our story, with our book, and they're going to go read something else. But if we never give them the delivery that we're promising, if we keep dragging it out over and over and over again, then we risk their anticipation turning into frustration. I'm sure you've read books that promised some big conclusion and then instead delivered a cliffhanger, dragging that conclusion out for another book. I've read series where that happened not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 4 or 5 or 6 times. And honestly, at a certain point, as a reader, I just would sigh, figure that I'd never actually know, and give up. And we don't want that for our reader. Instead, we want our tension in our stories to be a rising crescendo. We want it to constantly build. You know, someone described it as the pulling of a rubber band. You never know exactly when it's going to snap. But as you pull and pull and pull, that anticipation in you builds up. Because again, tension exists in the anticipation of the event. It's the anticipation of the snapping rubber band, not the actual snapping rubber band itself. So let's talk about a couple of ways that we can do this in our stories, walking this fine line of balance between the anticipation and the delivery of an event. There are a lot of different names for this technique, but I always think about it as the yes, but no, but yes technique. And this is actually the same as the sort of will they get together, won't they get together that you find in romance novels. In every genre, you're going to have a slight different nuance to how this technique is used. So make sure that you're studying your genre specifically for what the readers are expecting. When you set out to tell a story, you are bringing your reader on a journey. And like any journey, there are going to be twists and turns in the road. There are going to be bumps that have to be overcome. And that's where this yes, but no, but yes idea comes into play. Because just as a regular journey is going to take winding roads, it's going to have hills and valleys to overcome, your story needs to have those things too. But unlike walking from point A to point B, we want to make sure that we have a general upward trend throughout the entirety of our story. We don't start high and end low. Instead, your story is like climbing a mountain. You might not always be going up, but you are always gaining elevation across the breadth of your story. However, when a character sets out to achieve a certain goal, if you were to just say, okay, this is the first thing they did to achieve that goal, and then this is the second thing they did to achieve that goal, and then this is the third thing they did to achieve that goal, it gets kind of boring, especially if they're successful in each of those things. Instead, I want you to think about your journey, or rather the journey that your character is on, as a path leading up to the peak of a mountain. But along the way, there are small hills that rise and fall, always bringing you higher and higher and higher. And that's this yes, but no, but yes. Will my character achieve the outcome that they so desperately want? Yes, they will, but no, there's a problem. Oh, we've overcome that. Yes, they will, but no, there's another problem. You might think of this as wrinkles along the way. And as they encounter each of these wrinkles, as they overcome each of these wrinkles, you are going to be building the anticipation of the final victory in your reader. And the stronger that anticipation, the more likely they are to read all the way until that final payoff. And then the second way that we can really build tension in a story is by showing rather than telling. And I know that we hear this all of the time, and often people who say this never actually define it. But what I'm talking about specifically here is allowing the outside world to reflect the character's inside world. So when you're building tension, you're building anticipation. You're building the idea of what the payoff is actually going to be. Often our instinct as a writer is to simply explain to the reader what the character feels. If your character is walking through the forest on the way to a witch's hut, you might write, "Deep fear gripped her soul." And that's fine. You can do that. There's no law saying that you can't write that. But that's just a fact. You're just sort of saying this is the current state of things. Her soul is gripped by fear. And your reader is going to say, okay, I understand. Her soul is gripped by fear. That is a rational, intellectual understanding, though. That is not an emotional understanding. That is not an anticipation of what is coming. And so there's no tension in saying her soul was gripped by fear. Now, it's great shorthand for saying this is how the character is currently feeling. But again, if we're going to show rather than tell, we're going to use the external world to reveal the internal world. And so your character might be walking through the forest towards the witch's hut, and you might say, the fingers of the trees crept towards her in the cold moonlight. Now you're not describing how she's feeling. She could be utterly indifferent. I mean, she's probably not going to be if she thinks the trees have fingers and they're creeping towards her in the moonlight. And just like your character in that situation would not be calm, the reader is going to know that instinctively as well. They are not going to be calm. They're going to start anticipating something is coming because the environment suggests it. And when they start anticipating it, they will start putting their own emotions and their own feelings into it. They will start imagining how they would feel if they were walking through a forest and it looked like the trees had fingers that were slowly creeping towards them. In fact, the character doesn't even have to be aware of what's going on in order to have that anticipation build. That's one of the things that we learn from the great horror writers, who are masters of tension. It's almost better if your character doesn't know what's coming and the reader can anticipate it on their behalf. Because then you not only get the anticipation of the actual event, but you have the anticipation of the revelation to the character, and that reinforces the tension that your reader is going to feel. But as I've said earlier, this is a balancing act. This isn't something that we want to lay on too thick, because if there is too much tension, if there is too much stress in the book, your reader is going to put it down. They just won't want to read it. So we engage in this balancing act, stretching the tension in the story until it's almost going to snap and then easing off, saying, no, not quite yet. And then stretching a little bit further, eventually delivering that payoff that's going to feel so satisfying that our reader is going to absolutely love it and want to tell everybody else about it as well. Tension is something that takes a lifetime to master. And even the masters of tension always have room to improve. But as we continue to practice, as we continue to write, as we continue to build tension in our stories, enticing our readers with the interesting problems that we're presenting our characters and delivering on the promises that we're making them. We're going to find our writing getting better and better and better.